They tossed her away like a sack of potatoes, no name, no cradle, no prayers. Just a stained burlap sack half buried beneath frost and scrub, the desert wind too ashamed to lift it. Folks say babies don't cry once the cold sets in. But this one did. And when a lone cowboy heard the faintest whisper, "Mama," it stopped him cold. Because the voice wasn't just a baby's. It was a plea, raw and ghost-like, that twisted something deep inside a man who thought his heart was long gone. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a ride into the Old West. The cold bit through his duster like knives, the wind slicing sideways across the empty stretch of high desert, carrying no scent but dust and sorrow. Silas Creed hunched in his saddle, reins slack in weather-beaten hands, eyes squinting through the murk of dusk as if expecting ghosts to ride up beside him. He wasn't a man given to visions, but something pulled at him, a sound, or the echo of one, so faint it could have been memory. Then again, "Mama." Barely a breath, less than a word, but enough to freeze his blood. He jerked his horse to a stop, the animal snorting as if disturbed by the same whisper. Dismounting, boots crunching through frost-bitten earth, Silas stepped carefully toward a crumpled mound near the rocks. It was nothing but a stained burlap sack, held down by a flat stone like someone had tried to bury it without digging a grave. He stared. Something moved just a twitch, no more than the flap of a dying bird's wing. He dropped to his knees, breath shallow, and peeled the sack open. What lay inside shouldn't have been alive. A baby, maybe 4 months old, skin pale as ash, lips a ghostly blue, her tiny fingers curled tight against her chest like they'd forgotten how to ask for help. But her eyes were open, staring straight at him with a stillness that made the wind hush. She didn't cry, didn't whimper, just looked. A ragged horse blanket wrapped around her was soaked with blood at the edge, not hers, Silas noted, but someone else's. He lifted her carefully, expecting the worst, but her chest rose, slow and stubborn, and as he brought her close, she let out a shuddering sigh that sounded too much like mama for a man with sins like his to ignore. His throat clenched. He hadn't held anything so fragile since before the war, before the whiskey, before the fires that burned everything he used to be. "No name, huh?" he murmured, voice thick with something he'd long buried. The baby blinked. That was answer enough. He wrapped her tighter inside his coat, pressing her against his chest, and stood, boots unsteady under the weight of a life he didn't ask for but couldn't leave behind. The trail to Mercy Ridge was 20 miles through ice, coyote country, and worse things, memories Silas didn't like to meet in the dark. But he mounted up, pulled the girl close, and whispered into her ear like a vow, "You hold on now, little one. I ain't got much, but I got legs, and they know the way." The horse trudged forward, hooves crunching through snow as the plains stretched endless ahead. Behind them, the sack lay still, empty now, except for the cold and the crime of forgetting. Silas didn't look back. Couldn't. The wind chased him, tugging at his coat, howling like it wanted the child returned to silence. But he rode on, jaw clenched, past the place where the sky broke and stars tried to hide, because something in that baby's stare had struck him deeper than bullet or blade. It wasn't just a rescue, it was judgment. And maybe, just maybe, a second chance. The first orange slits of dawn were just breaking over the hills when Silas Creed rode into Mercy Ridge, the horse staggering beneath the weight of cold and conscience. The baby curled beneath his coat like a coal barely holding onto its glow. The town hadn't changed much in 15 years, same leaning storefronts, same cracked church bell, same eyes peering through lace curtains like they never stopped watching. The minute his boots hit the mud-caked street, silence followed. A few folks on porches froze mid-rock. A shopkeeper ducked inside, and a boy with a sack of feed dropped it, scattering kernels like seeds of alarm. Silas didn't blame them. He'd earned their suspicion long ago, deserting the cavalry, taking up with outlaws, disappearing into the scrub after a botched robbery that left 2 deputies dead. Mercy Ridge remembered. Towns like this never forget. He walked slow toward the doctor's office, holding the baby close, her skin clammy against his chest, breath shallow like it was scared of being noticed. The door slammed before he even reached it. "Doctor." Whitlow, fat with righteousness, shouted from behind the glass. Ain't no charity here for bastards or the bastards who carry 'em. Silas didn't flinch, just turned to the gathering onlookers, their judgment thick enough to choke. "She's dyin'," he said, voice low but steady. "You gonna let a baby die 'cause you hate me?" No one stepped forward until a woman did. Clara Langley, bonnetless, hair streaked with iron and wind, eyes sharper than any lawman's badge. She pushed past the crowd, grabbed the child from Silas's arms without a word, and walked straight into her home 2 doors down. No drama, no permission, just purpose. Inside, Silas watched her work boiling cloths, warming milk, rubbing frostbitten fingers with oils that smelled like rosemary and defiance. "She got a name?" Clara asked finally. Silas shook his head. "Not one she gave me." Clara nodded. "Then she'll need one. But not from you. Not yet." Outside, the town buzzed. Rumors bloomed like rot. Some said the baby was Silas's, born of sin. Others whispered she was Injun, or worse, mixed blood, unwanted, untouchable. Old feuds reignited like coals kicked in a hearth. Sheriff Dade Collier, once Silas's friend, now little more than a spine and a badge, paid him a visit. "You need to leave, Silas. You ain't welcome here. Not with that thing." Silas didn't argue, didn't shout, just looked up from the porch where he sat with his rifle across his lap and said, "She said mama." Dade blinked. "You sure?" Like a prayer she thought someone might answer. Dade spat in the dirt. "That don't mean she's yours to keep." Silas nodded once, slow. "Then tell me who she is." But no one could. No one wanted to. And so he stayed, taking odd jobs no one else would, sleeping in the church stable, always close to Clara's house but never crossing her door without cause. He watched the baby's color return, her breath strengthen, her fists clench like she was remembering how to fight. And with every day that passed, the question dug deeper into his ribs. Who leaves a child to die in the cold, whispering the name of a mother, and why was he the one meant to hear it? Clara moved with the surety of a woman who had brought life into this world and watched it leave too soon. Hands steady, eyes unwavering, heart wrapped in scar tissue thick enough to defy judgment. For 3 days and nights, she nursed the baby in silence, feeding her drops of goat's milk, laying her beside the fire wrapped in a shawl of wool and whispered lullabies. Silas didn't sleep much during that time. He sat outside her cabin like a dog left at a grave, his rifle across his lap and his mind deep in places he'd spent years trying to forget. The baby's shallow breathing echoed in his ears even when she wasn't near, and sometimes when the fire cracked just right or the wind sighed through the rafters, he'd slip into memories he didn't summon. A campfire in Arizona, laughter soft like a river's song, a woman with eyes too kind for a man like him, pressing her hand over her stomach as she whispered, "You'll be better by then." He never knew what then meant. He never stayed to find out. Whiskey and regret had a way of burning bridges before you even crossed them. Now he watched this baby small, pale, and clawing her way back from the edge like she had something left to prove, and wondered if life circled back on itself. Not to offer mercy, but to finish what you ran from. On the 4th morning, Clara stepped out and handed him something wrapped in linen so small he thought it was a coin. "Found it sewn in her rags," she said, voice tight. He unfolded the cloth and found a silver locket, tarnished but intact, no larger than a bullet's casing. He opened it. One side held a pressed flower, crumbling to dust. The other, etched with delicate lettering, read a single name. Etta. Silas felt his breath stall. That name didn't belong to Mercy Ridge. It belonged to another chapter, darker, buried, nearly drowned in blood and smoke. A saloon south of the border, a runaway girl with a bruise on her collarbone and a voice like wet ash. Etta, not May. Not the woman he left behind in the high country, but someone connected to her. Someone who vanished after a job went wrong, leaving nothing but unanswered questions and half-warnings. He closed the locket and looked toward the window where the baby now slept in a woven cradle Clara had pulled down from the attic. She looked stronger. Her cheeks held color now, her breathing steady. But there was something behind her eyes, a stillness, like she was waiting for someone to name the danger that brought her here. Silas stared at her and whispered, "You weren't meant to die out there." And then, quieter, "You were meant to be found." It didn't make sense. Not yet, but in his gut. He knew the truth had a shape. Someone left that child in the cold with just enough thread tying her to the past, and they'd made damn sure it would be Silas Creed who picked up the thread. Whether it was a trap, a cry for help, or some cruel twist of fate, he didn't know. But it meant one thing clear as daybreak on an empty trail: this wasn't over. Not for him, not for the child, not for the ghosts clawing at the edges of memory, waiting to be named. The sun hadn't yet risen when Silas saddled his mare and rode west, retracing the path to where frost still clung to memory and the earth hadn't yet covered its sins. He kept his eyes low, searching not for salvation, but for the pieces the cold hadn't buried: hoofprints, broken twigs, anything that hinted at where that baby had come from, or who might have left her to die. A mile out, he found the first clue. A line of blood frozen into the soil, faint but unmistakable, dragged in a crooked arc toward a patch of low mesquite. He dismounted and followed it on foot, the silence around him so complete it made his own breath sound like thunder. Under one branch, fluttering like it didn't know how to give up, hung a torn scrap of shawl blue, frayed at the edges and soaked at the corner with dried blood. He recognized the fabric, not the piece itself, but the pattern. It was the kind worn by women traveling alone, trying to pass unnoticed on dangerous trails. A few yards farther on, boot prints scattered in a half-moon too large to be a woman's, and too many to be a coincidence. 4 men, maybe 5, judging by the spacing. Moving fast, but not running. Men who'd done what they came to do and left without looking back. He kept following the trail until the stench hit him: charred wood, scorched leather, and something heavier beneath it all. The coppery sting of blood, long dried but not yet forgotten. The wagon lay in a shallow ravine, blackened and half-collapsed, its iron bolts warped from heat. He approached slowly, rifle in hand, expecting bones or worse. But there were no bodies, no grave markers, no sign of who died or who escaped, only scorched bedding, shattered glass from a lantern, and a torn saddlebag flung like a curse against a rock. The snow around the wreckage had melted and refrozen into jagged ice, preserving every boot scuff, every drag mark. Someone had fought here. Someone had bled. But someone had also lived long enough to crawl away with a baby wrapped in their shawl and vanish into the freezing dark. On the edge of the wreckage, half buried beneath a wheel, he spotted something cloth-bound and scorched. He pried it loose with his knife and found a handkerchief, mostly blackened, but with one corner still white enough to read the initials stitched in faded thread. M.H. He stared at the letters like they were ghosts. May Hollis. The name hit him like a rifle butt to the ribs. Not Etta. Not some distant stranger. May. The woman he left behind in a cabin near Yuma when the law came too close and his courage ran too thin. She had whispered something then, holding her belly, eyes wide with something close to fear and something closer to hope. "You'll come back, Silas. You'll see." He hadn't. And now, all that was left was a baby who said, "Mama," a fire that spoke of murder, and a name burned into cloth like a scar across time. He tucked the handkerchief into his coat, mounted up, and stared toward the horizon. Whoever came for May didn't finish the job right, and if they were still out there, he aimed to find them not for vengeance, but for the truth. Because something told him this wasn't just about the past. It was about what kind of man he'd die as if he turned away now. The sheriff's office hadn't changed since Silas last stepped foot in it. Same warped floorboards, same wanted posters curling at the corners, same desk where law got scribbled onto paper like it meant something permanent. Sheriff Dade Collier sat behind that desk now, older, broader, his badge duller than memory allowed, but his eyes still sharp as broken glass. He looked up when Silas walked in, and for a moment, neither man spoke, just stared across a gulf made of years and regrets. "I figured you'd show," Dade finally said, voice flat as the plains. "News travels faster than forgiveness around here." Silas didn't sit, just stood, the weight of the locket and the handkerchief heavy in his coat. "You get a wire?" he asked. Dade nodded and reached into a drawer, pulling out a crumpled telegram. "Came 2 days ago from Cochise County. Name on it was May Hollis. Wanted for the murder of a rancher and his wife. Said she was traveling with an infant. They think she's running north." Silas clenched his jaw. "May wouldn't kill no one." Dade raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? You ain't seen her in over a decade, Creed. People change. Silas stepped forward, fists tight at his sides. She saved me once, Dade. Back when you and I both knew I wasn't worth saving. She don't got that in her. Dade leaned back in his chair, the old wood groaning beneath his weight. You remember that night outside Yuma? He asked, voice low now. You got me out of that canyon alive. I never paid you back for that. So here it is, my favor. He slid the telegram across the desk. I'll hold off sending word you're here. But this baby, she brings questions, and if someone comes looking, I can't protect you, or Clara, or that child if you're just sitting on your hands. Silas took the paper, eyes scanning the cold accusation etched in ink, but all he saw was the woman in his memory smiling at him across a campfire, humming some old song she swore her mother sang. The kind of woman who patched bullet holes and made you promise not to get shot again. As if that was something a man like him could control. Outside the jailhouse, the wind carried the faint sound of a baby crying. It cut through him sharper than any blade. He turned and saw Clara walking briskly toward her house, the child bundled in her arms, red-faced and screaming, not the weak mewling of before, but a full-bellied howl that spoke of life clawing its way back. Silas watched, something raw swelling in his chest. That cry, it wasn't pain anymore. It was will, fire, a name waiting to be spoken. He didn't know if May was alive, or if she left that baby knowing he'd find her. But he knew one thing. Someone wanted the truth buried. Maybe May was dead. Maybe she'd been framed. Maybe the men who burned that wagon wanted the baby silenced, and they'd be coming for her next. Either way, Silas couldn't sit in Mercy Ridge playing watchman while ghosts closed in. He looked back at Dade. I'm riding out tomorrow, he said. I find her or I find whoever tried to end her. Dade gave a slow nod, tapping ash from a cold cigar. Just don't bring war back with you, Creed. This town's still bleeding from the last one. Silas didn't answer. He just stepped into the dusk, where the wind whispered names he hadn't dared say out loud in years. The ride to Devil's Pass wasn't just hard, it was haunted. Silas felt every mile like a prayer flung against a storm, the land growing harsher with each bend of trail, each rock-scarred ridge reminding him of choices he'd buried beneath dust and time. The scrub gave way to jagged stone as he entered outlaw country, a place where lawmen didn't ride and mercy was just a word you carved into headstones. He hadn't been here in over 10 years, not since the gang scattered like ashes after a shootout that left more than bullets behind. But the hollow still stood tucked beneath a lip of black shale and pine, a place May had once called her shadow nest. She used it to hide from bounty hunters when things got hot, a narrow cleft barely big enough for a fire and a bedroll. Silas dismounted, leading his horse carefully down the slope, boots crunching gravel as wind sliced through the gorge with the cry of something ancient and angry. Then he saw him, a man sprawled against the rock wall, blood pooling under his hip, one hand clutching his stomach where a blade had found its mark. His breath rattled like an old bellows, and flies already circled his face. Silas dropped beside him, lifting his head gently. The man's eyes flicked open, glassy and wide. Creed? He rasped, barely a whisper. Silas nodded. I'm here. Who did this? The dying man gave a sick grin, teeth red. Wasn't supposed to be you. She said you wouldn't come. Who? Silas pressed. May? The man's gaze shifted to some point behind Silas, beyond the sky. She trusted the wrong one, he murmured. Said he was family. Said you'd warned her. His body twitched, and for a moment Silas thought he'd slipped under. Then came the name drawn out like poison being bled. Jericho. Silas froze, the sound striking him like a blow to the gut. Jericho Crane. The name didn't just belong to a man. It belonged to everything Silas hated about who he used to be. A killer dressed in charm, a friend with a forked tongue, the last man May ever begged him not to ride with. Silas remembered that night, her eyes full of fear, her voice barely louder than the thunder outside their cabin. He's wrong, Silas. There's a blackness in him that eats whatever it touches. If you ride with him, I'm gone. Silas had ridden anyway, not out of loyalty to Jericho, but out of fear of staying still. By the time he came back, May was gone. Now here was proof that Jericho had found her after all and done what vipers do. The dying man's breath hitched. She ran, baby in her arms, Said she had to find you. Then he coughed, and the sound ended in silence, long and final. Silas laid the man's head gently on a folded saddlebag, then stood and looked toward the horizon, where the sky bled red against jagged peaks. Anger surged, but it wasn't the wild, reckless rage of youth. It was older now, forged slow like iron, and wrapped in shame. He had left May once when she needed him. He would not do it again. If Jericho Crane was out there, if he'd spilled May's blood and left her baby for dead in the cold, then Silas Creed had a trail to ride and a reckoning to bring. Not just for her, for the man he used to be. Clara Langley stood at the edge of her porch with the baby in her arms as Silas rode in under a bruised evening sky, his coat heavy with road dust and eyes darker than when he left. The child had changed in his absence, stronger, louder, fighting her bottle and gripping Clara's fingers with a stubbornness that made the older woman smile despite herself. But the town hadn't softened. Word had spread. Old men on benches whispered about bloodlines and bad omens, and women at the mercantile eyed Clara like she'd taken in a snake. The baby's features, almond-shaped eyes, high cheekbones, deep brown skin kissed with rose, spoke of heritage the West still feared. "She's not one of us," a shopkeeper hissed that morning. "She belongs with her kind or behind a fence, where the law can decide." Clara had said nothing, just turned and walked away, her jaw tight, her spine straighter than a rifle barrel. Now, with Silas back, she didn't wait for excuses. "You better tell me what you know," she said, handing him the baby without ceremony. He took the child in his arms, and for a moment his hard expression cracked, something soft flickering beneath years of regret. "She's May's," he said, "and maybe mine." Clara's breath caught. "Yours?" Silas nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the child. "It was years back. We were fire and smoke never lasted long in one place, but she talked about settling, said she might be carrying. I didn't stay long enough to know. But if she ran with that baby and died trying to get here, then it wasn't just chance she was left in my path." Clara studied him. The baby nestled into the crook of his arm like she belonged there. "Why come back now?" she asked. "After all this time?" Silas didn't look up. "Because I'm tired of running from things I should have stood up for. She believed I could be better, and I'm done proving her wrong." The words hung heavy between them. Years of unspoken grief folded into a single truth. Clara turned her gaze to the child. "You know what they'll say. That she's not white. That she don't belong here. They'll call her a half-breed and worse." Silas looked up then, eyes steady. "Then we teach her to belong to herself, not to them." Clara's lips pressed into a line. "They'll come asking. The law. The territory board. You ready for that?" "I am," he said. "Long as you are too." She nodded once, the gesture sharp as flint. "Then she stays. But she needs a name." Silas looked down at the baby, who had gone quiet in his arms, her tiny hand curled around the locket she now wore on a string. "Hope," he said softly, "because that's what May carried her with." Clara blinked hard, then stepped closer. "Hope Creed," she said aloud, as if testing how it sounded on the wind. And for the first time since the child had been brought in near frozen and wordless, she cooed just a little and nestled deeper into Silas's chest. They stood like that, three shadows in the firelight, while the town around them darkened and watched, whispering old fears. But inside that little house with cracked windows and warm hands, a choice had been made. The past could come knocking, but they would meet it at the door together. The sun was just climbing over the eastern ridge when Silas Creed, bloodied and limping, dragged Jericho Crane through the town square by the collar of his black duster, leaving a crimson trail behind him like a broken oath. The outlaw's breaths were shallow, hissed between clenched teeth, but his eyes still burned with venom even as his strength leaked into the dirt. Silas didn't stop until he stood before the sheriff's office, where Dade Collier stood waiting, gun drawn, jaw locked, heart clearly wrestling with the weight of what must be done. "Your turn," Silas said, voice hoarse. "He ain't mine to finish." Dade looked at Jericho, then at the crowd gathering behind them, and saw the fear twisting their faces. He holstered his weapon, nodded once, and turned to the gang that lingered by their horses. "Drop your irons," he barked. And to the town's astonishment they obeyed. One by one, The men were disarmed, shackled, and marched toward the jailhouse. For the first time in years, the law of Mercy Ridge held its spine. Clara stepped from the chapel steps, hope in her arms, eyes wide as the baby watched Silas stagger toward her. The infant reached for him not with a cry, but with a soft, cooing gurgle, her tiny fingers stretching as if she knew her protector had returned. Silas touched her cheek with trembling fingers and whispered, "She's safe now." That afternoon, with Jericho locked away and the town shaken but intact, Silas rode alone to the crumbling remains of the old mission just outside town, the place May once said she'd run to if the world ever came for her. Beneath a twisted juniper, he found the fresh mound marked only with a crude wooden cross and a stone bearing her initials. M.H. He collapsed to his knees, tears he hadn't shed in 20 years cutting silent paths down his weathered cheeks. He placed the silver locket at the foot of the grave, pressing it into the soil like an offering, and whispered through clenched teeth, "She's safe, May. She's got a chance now, and I won't run this time." That evening, as stars scattered over the town like scattered prayers, he returned to Clara's house and found her sitting by the hearth, hope curled asleep in her arms. Clara looked up, searching his face for what had changed, and found it in the soft way he took the child, in the way his hand lingered on her back like he was afraid to let go. "She needs a father," Clara said quietly. "And I ain't that," he replied. "But I'll learn how to be." The next morning, the town stirred to the sound of creaking doors and morning bells, and Silas walked into the chapel with hope bundled close to his chest. The pews were empty, but the air was thick with quiet. He stepped to the altar, the same one beneath which she'd once been hidden, and stood there a long moment before lifting her up into the rising sun streaming through the stained glass. "This world's tried to take everything from you," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "But it didn't get me, and it never will again." He drew a breath and let the word fall like a vow, soft, reverent, and final. "Daughter." Hope stirred, eyelids fluttering. Somewhere outside, the wind shifted, warmer now, as if the land itself had exhaled. And for the first time in a long, long while, Silas Creed felt like something had been set right. The dust hadn't even settled from Jericho Crane's boots before the town started whispering like prairie grass before a twister slick in a black duster, 2 silver pistols at his sides, and a federal badge flashing from his vest like salvation dipped in deceit. He rode in with 3 men, all clean-shaven, tight-lipped, with eyes that didn't blink and hands that never strayed far from their belts. Claimed they were with the Territorial Bureau of Child Welfare, sent to retrieve a kidnapped orphan matching Hope's description. Said her mother was a fugitive and her father unknown. His voice slithered through the town square like molasses on glass, polite, rehearsed, just official enough to make good folks squirm. Clara stood on her porch, clutching Hope close, her jaw locked tight as coffin nails. Silas watched from the shadows beside the church, his gut boiling with the kind of anger that made your soul shake. He knew Jericho's tells how he smiled too easily, how his eyes always scanned for exits, how he carried that damn pocket watch he used to time out kills. He wasn't here for justice. He was here to finish what he started. By sundown, the town was divided. Some folks, tired of danger, whispered that maybe handing the child over would bring peace. Others, remembering the silence after May Hollis vanished, weren't so quick to sell a soul for quiet. Sheriff Dade stayed quiet too long, so Silas acted. He and Clara slipped through back alleys and under moonlight, carrying Hope wrapped in linen to the old chapel on the edge of town. The cellar below the altar hadn't held anything holy in years, but it held secrets well. "She don't come out," Silas told Clara. "No matter what you hear." Clara nodded, tears in her eyes, not from fear but from fury. Then Silas stepped into the firelight. Jericho was waiting outside the saloon, leaning against a post like a man with all the time in the world. The crowd gathered quiet, boots shifting in dust, no one speaking. Silas walked slow, hand loose by his side. "I should have buried you in Bisbee," he said. Jericho smiled, a slow, snake-coiled thing. "And I should have burned that girl when I had the chance. But you, Silas, you always leave things half done." "You kill May?" Silas asked, loud enough for all to hear. Jericho's smile faded, and in its place came something meaner. "She died crying your name. Tried to hide the girl. Wouldn't talk. so I took what I could. His hand twitched, and steel flashed, but Silas was already moving. The crack of gunfire shattered the stillness, and people screamed as the world narrowed to smoke and sparks. They circled slow, trading shots like memories painful, close, unforgiving. A bullet tore through Silas's arm, but he kept coming. Another grazed his thigh. Then his round found home, slamming into Jericho's side and dropping him to one knee. Blood poured from his mouth as he spat. She was leverage. That's all she ever was. Silas stood over him, gun raised, but didn't fire again. "You were wrong," he said. She was hope. And with that he turned and walked into the dark, past wide-eyed townsfolk who didn't know whether to cheer or run. Behind him, Jericho groaned and bled, the badge fallen from his chest like a lie too heavy to wear. The fire still crackled in the saloon's lanterns, but the real blaze had been set elsewhere in the cellar of a chapel, where a baby slept safe, and the town would soon have to decide whether to protect what was right or let fear win. The seasons rolled slow and steady through Mercy Ridge. Like a hymn hummed by the land itself, snow gave way to thaw. Green crept back into the hills, and the ache of what had been began to loosen its grip on what still could be. Where once folks crossed the street to avoid Silas Creed, they now offered a nod, a sack of flour left on the porch, a quiet thanks not spoken aloud but felt all the same. The baby they'd feared grew fast, fierce in her own quiet way, toddling between Clara's skirts and Silas's legs, calling one mama and the other pa without understanding the miracle of it. Hope chased chickens in the yard, laughed like thunder cracking the clouds, and fell asleep each night curled on Silas's chest, her breath steady, her fingers always curled around a piece of his shirt, beard, or thumb as if she'd never let go again. Silas stayed. He worked the soil behind Clara's house, mended fences, helped Dade keep the peace when whiskey got too loud on Saturday nights. The scar on his arm ached when rain came, and the ghost still whispered sometimes when the fire burned low, but he didn't run. Not anymore. He sat in the front pew of the chapel each Sunday, never saying much, but always listening. People watched. Then they followed. Not all, not at once, but enough. They brought their children to see Hope, marveled at the color of her eyes and the bold way she stomped her boots, as if daring the earth to deny her place. One morning, a traveler passed through town, dusty, sunburned, saddle-weary. He bought coffee at the saloon, leaned against the post out front, and asked the sheriff, "Who's that fella mending the fence yonder? The one with the girl on his shoulders?" Sheriff Dade looked up from his cup, eyes narrowed against the glare of the rising Sunday. Silas stood out in the field, Hope bouncing on his back, giggling as she pulled at his old hat and shrieked with delight. Silas just smiled and kept hammering, one nail at a time, the rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Dade sipped his coffee and said, That's Silas Creed. Used to be a ghost. Now he's the one who haunts the living back to life." The traveler didn't understand, not really, but nodded like he did and rode on. And Mercy Ridge kept breathing, kept healing. Even the wind had changed. It no longer howled or wept across the plains. Now it moved gentle, brushing the tall grass with soft fingers, as if listening, as if grateful. At twilight, Silas would sit on the porch with Clara beside him, Hope curled between them like a bridge they'd built out of broken wood and stubborn hope. They didn't speak much, there wasn't need. The silence between them was full, and when stars came out, Silas would sometimes look at the sky and wonder if May saw all this, if she knew her girl was safe, loved, and teaching a weary town how to believe again. He didn't pray, but he whispered sometimes, not to be heard, just to be known. And the world, at last, whispered back.